The Collectors by Mark Holtzclaw. If you happen to visit the Northland Shopping Mall during the week at 5 o'clock, you might catch a glimpse of an amazing sight. In a technique that took months to perfect, Salisbury Davis was able to maneuver his way through an ever-changing maze of people in search of that elusive exit. "Hello," a voice interrupted. "I'm doing a survey for Datamates. Would you have a moment?" His feet stopped as his head started to turn. The voice became a young man, whose features were on the verge of feminine. He held a clipboard in his hand, and was taking some sort of poll. Questions answered by more questions. Salisbury wondered what they did with all this useless information. Perhaps feed it into a huge computer to write tomorrow's history books about today's people. But as his thoughts were colliding, he could hear the survey's voice. "How old are you? Do you have a girlfriend? Are you loved?" Salisbury became embarrassed and turned to leave. Maybe the expression on the seat of his pants would tell that survey everything. Without even raising a hand, he would slap them across their senses with silence and retreat. That was something no words could ever define, nor should. The survey moved to another young man. This victim was seated alone. "Hello, I'm doing a survey for Datamates. Would you have a moment?" The man shook his head. "No, thank you, sir." The survey walked to a corner of the mall near the closed toy shop. It was dark and quiet there. Here alone the survey could cry swollen tears from red puffy eyes. The words, "No, thank you, sir," ringing behind them, provoking more tears to evacuate. The survey was a girl. Not a boy, and not a sir. And it was the 5th time that afternoon she had been called Mr., or some other masculine title. Her hand moved to touch the tears as they trembled on her cheek. She reached into her trouser pocket. Fortunately, she had remembered to bring the bottle of eye drops with her. She took it out and held it in front of her eyes. The bottle was empty, but that was the way she needed it. She squeezed the air out of the white plastic bottle. Then, running the nozzle up her face, she vacuumed every trace of tears away. The tiny container inhaled and swallowed every last bit of sorrow. Then, clicking her pen, she wrote across the front of the bottle the word "shame." Tomorrow somehow became today, which was her day off. Now she could visit her favorite place in the world, Griffith's Memorial Garden. She always brought a book of poetry with her, Browning, Wordsworth, Hood, Shelley, and Emily Dickinson. She passed her first hour wandering among the names. People chiseled in marble, granite, and alabaster. Then she sat to picnic on wax-paper sandwiches. After a short nap, she would recite poetry to the tombstones. And then, just before she left, she would visit her favorite grave of all. For she had something in common with the woman buried there. It was her name. She sat down on the grass and stroked her fingers across the marble epitaph. It gave her a peculiar sensation to see her own name pronounced on a tombstone. But there it was, just the same. In loving memory of Molly Hill. Perhaps she could play the game, the one where she herself was buried there, and that another girl would come and visit her grave. Sometimes she would dream she was enshrined there, that she was the loving memory concealed in the dust crib. Then the other girl watching over her grave would change before her dream eyes into someone else. It would no longer be her face, but the dreaming face of a stranger. Eyes reading her tombstone, Molly Hill. It was dinner now, and her parents would be searching for her. Her eyes waved goodbye to her name, and she left. Tomorrow was Sunday. She would come back then. On her way down the path she noticed a youth digging a new grave. She paused for a moment to watch. His face and arms were shellacked with perspiration. People even work for you when you are dead. Yes, even when you are dead. And with that last thought, Molly turned down the hill to return to the graves of the living, her home a crypt, her bed a coffin. One big grave, she thought. And today her grave smiled wider, for it was her birthday. 21 years less on this green earth, and 21 years closer to Griffith's Memorial Garden. Molly had come to dread that familiar date when it surfaced on the calendar. She would gain the weight of 1 year overnight, 365 days, pound upon pound, delivered at her doorstep with "Happy Birthday" shouts. Presents were given to recompense the years taken away from her. Those horrible gifts that littered the floor and walls like trophies. Awards presented for coming this far and outwitting death. And each year she told her parents to end the celebrations. Remove the salt from an already deep wound. So maybe then it could heal and she might forget. Molly thought on this and that as she paced from here to there. Her mother kissed her into the house. "Hey, sweets, I was hoping you'd be home earlier. I cooked spaghetti with meatballs." Samantha Hill ushered her daughter into the parlor. Then Molly's father came in and gave her a great birthday squeeze. "How old today, Princess, huh?" Molly spotted her reflection across the hall. It revealed a short girl with hair the shade of flame. She had a nose that pointed north, and a constellation of freckles that swept the pale reaches of a moon face. Mr. Hill subtracted something from his pocket. It was an envelope. He handed it to Molly. "This is from your mother and me." He nodded his head at the envelope. "Go ahead and open it." Molly carefully ripped off the end. Inside was a card with a puppy and a kitten on the cover. A slip of paper fell out. Molly stooped to pick it up. It looked like a check. But she could see it was a questionnaire from Datamates, the place where she did her surveys. They matched people together, any kinds, all kinds. Everyone needed to find their missing half. Molly wondered what was going through her parents' minds. Did they really believe she would bounce aimlessly through life? Was this the answer to all the ugly misfits in the world? Datamates? That night, as Molly dressed for bed, she slipped the white bottle out of her pocket. She had almost forgotten it. She took it to the secret drawer in her dresser. Behind stockings and underneath panties were scores of other eye-drop containers. She had collected them over a period of 3 years. This was the 12th one. Each one had a different label, like Midnight Sorrow, Tears of Joy, November Rage, Fear of Airplanes, and so on. She had collected her tears and stored them away for a rainy day. Then she would take one out and squeeze a few drops into a drink and toast an emotion gone by. All of her private feelings were bottled up and hidden away. Molly couldn't recall when she first got the idea for all this. Maybe it was her parents telling her not to keep her emotions bottled up inside her, or it could have been her father's favorite song, "Drink to me with thine eyes." Of course, not all the containers had tears in them. She substituted sweat and even saliva when necessary. Molly reached in and selected a bottle, September Infatuation. She had collected this one in the dark reaches of a movie auditorium. The film had been a romance. This would be the perfect passion for a long Sunday afternoon, she thought. And so the post-morning sun found Molly at her familiar picnic area. She was seated on a patch of grass between a mother and a doctor. She brought out her book and flipped it open to the creased page. "The soul selects her own society," she read. "Then shuts the door, On her divine majority obtrude no more. Molly's language rhythms were swept away by the cry of the wind. It stole her words and blew them to the four corners of the still courtyard. A digger paused to cock his head, and listen, then resume again. Molly realized it was the very same youth she had seen the day before. She waved at him, but he did not appear to notice. Her eyes focused him in. He was brilliantly tall, and moved in a manner that suggested a lover. The spade split the air, arching, to mate with the soil, entering the earth amorously. His clothes hung, flapping in the breeze, for he was surprisingly thin. The sinew of his muscles twisted and flexed in sweaty streams. He swung injected, through the soil, and repeated. Molly was captivated. Entranced, she found herself romanticizing with the dark-haired youth. For he was indeed brooding, with almost sordid eyes, or so she speculated. But the distance was great, and her vision indistinct. So Molly's imagination was filling in and coloring the details. If only she could walk over and introduce herself to him. But then what would she say? Why did everyone treat her like poison? Only once had she ever been asked out, and that had been arranged by her parents. They had tried to find someone for her, anyone. But the simple truth of it all was that nobody seemed to care. And they took one look at her and never looked back. Perhaps her parents should have named her Medusa. Molly removed the bottle from her pocket. She should have brought the bottle of autumn courage with her today. Psychologically, that might stimulate and motivate a conversation. And then sentences could be swung back and forth. Molly took out the folded questionnaire and began to fill it in. Under favorite places, she put down Griffith's Memorial Garden. For hobbies, she wrote that she liked to collect memories. Then she put down her age, sex, physical description, and personality profile. Did these things really work? Molly had worked at Datamates for nearly a year now, and she had no idea how successful they were. Sunday finally began to get drowsy. The sun had lost its brilliance, and the insects collected in the chill air. Dusk seeped into Molly and numbed her. After a while her feet woke up and found their way back down the familiar trail. Another day had come and gone. The weekend had died. It was not even worth a paragraph for her diary. She let herself be swallowed by that institution known as home, and led to her chamber, the cell at the end of the hall. Twilight had begun to blossom its purple stains throughout her room. With sleepy haste, Molly attired herself for that thing that called itself a bed. She rested deep within the landscape of blankets that waited to entomb her slumbering cadaver, and there she would remain in silent and still repose, until the dawn came to release her from this simulated imitation of death. Then time would resume its melancholy stretch through another day. And so she would go on, renewing herself in this vehicle called sleep, until the ferry took her to the dark streams of forever. To sleep beneath the ground that waited to embrace her, until she became like the earth itself, just dust. Molly dreamed over a wedding of tombstones. The line that separated life from death was removed, and forgotten relatives walked again. Granny Hawkins and Cousin Marsh skipped with her through gardens of people. They were celebrating the marriage of the dead. The Creator was returning for his church, and every living and dead thing cried out in wild joy. Songs of hysteric glee were carried over the sill of yesterday. And the sun did rise. Across the heavens from the east, brilliant and glorious, a chariot of flames riding the skies, gliding the cemeteries of the world moving west. The people changed into beams of light and were carried off by the sun. Golden rays stirring the sleeping souls of yesterday, awakening them to a blinding resurrection. And the dawn probed its warm fingers over the dreaming eyes of Molly Hill. Her eyes yawned open to her room, and she pondered the trilogy of life. From womb to room to tomb. People were prisoners before they were born, incarcerated when they were alive, and locked away forever in death. Did freedom ever exist, or was it merely an illusion? Molly hastened to the mailbox in her robe, and stamped off her questionnaire to data-mates. It was better this way, she reasoned. She did not want anyone to see her bringing it into work. The week moved slowly, and Molly wondered if the computer world would locate her missing half. And then one afternoon a letter arrived. It was branded with the data-mates insignia. She tore it open with excitement. Inside was an appointment to meet the other person. The meeting place was Griffith's Memorial Garden. Molly had put that down as her favorite place. Did the other person put that down, too? She jumped and bubbled and spouted in suspense. The day was to be March 3rd, 2012. That was less than a week away. But to Molly, meeting this nameless man seemed an eternity. She sometimes found herself staring at the clock, trying to force the hands to move faster with her eyes. The magic day was finally born. Molly was to arrive at 2 and wait by the front gates, but instead she came early. She posed beside the columns, like an expectant statue watching the street. But nothing stirred there. In fact, it was empty. Even the wind waited. The hush continued on. Molly glanced at her watch. It was already after 2. Not even a car passed. The avenue was desolate. Then something touched her. It felt her shoulder and rapped gently. Molly looked around. To say she was surprised would be an understatement, for before her eyes stood the dark youth who dug the graves. He was dressed differently now. His lips parted. "It is you," he breathed. "The week-end girl." Molly felt happy nervous, a jumble of emotions about to explode. "You noticed me?" she asked. Her voice sounded different to her. "How could I not?" the boy replied shyly. "I've always wanted to talk to you, but I was afraid that you might run away, that you would rather be by yourself." Molly's eyes smiled at him. "Oh, if only you knew how much I wanted to talk to you!" Then she observed a strange gadget slung over his shoulder. "It's an old cassette recorder," he explained. "I collect sounds in here." He touched the object with his hand. "Wherever I go, my silent friend accompanies me. You see, it has a much better memory than I." Molly was ecstatic and emotionally electrocuted. "I collect memories, too," she cried. "Only I put them in bottles." "Bottles?" he echoed. "Now, how would one go about doing that?" Molly pulled an eye-drop container from her pocket and told him about the collection she had hidden at home. "But please," she prompted him, "tell me more about your collection of sounds." His blue eyes searched her. A light twinkled and sparkled there. "All right, but first you must walk with me through this great land." He swept his arm in a classical gesture at the cemetery. Molly bowed and flourished her arm. Then they strolled side by side among the afternoon shadows, like virgins in the woods. "A long time ago," he began, "I had a diary where I recorded all my secret thoughts and fondest days. dreams painted on paper walls, a house of many stories. But I found that I was losing the essential and most important part of those days. And that was the sounds, something that no printed word could ever recapture. The sound of life, moving, breathing, scurrying, in another time, trapped forever on plastic tape. He paused to drink in the distant sea air. So it was on my 16th birthday when my parents presented me with this recorder. I have treasured it ever since. And it has never let me down. It has a fertile mind of its own. And though it has but one ear, it hears everything. Nothing slides by unnoticed. Can you imagine that? Molly was mesmerized by him, and fell under the spell of his words. So this, he continued on, has become my explanation for life. This is the proof I offer, for my last 7 years in this world. The truth my existence is not a dream. The cassette tape has replaced my diary, and the microphone is the pen I use to write with. I have a collection that is as vast as my apartment. A library of forgotten sounds shelved here, resting there. My trip to Miranaw Heights on the desk. Uncle Jameson's funeral on my nightstand. Everywhere, every place. A new day was waiting to come back and be discovered again. Each night I lie upon my bed and listen. I blind the windows, dim the lights, and shut my eyes. Then the time-captured aromas reawaken my mind. My ears translate the smells, tastes, and sights of that particular day. And so it lives again for me. Until now that has been my life. I collected, but never gave. The clock told me I must change, or I might spin my life away in circles of sound. And so I filled out a certain questionnaire at Datamates. His eyes met her, and she felt a connection. And here we are now, he smiled impishly, joined together by a modern society, by a whim of electronics, linked by a common interest in life, death, and everything between. Molly tilted her head in acknowledgment. "That is the sandwich we must all consume," she mused. "Oh, and by the way, my name is Molly." He grinned loudly, his teeth catching the light. "And I am Brentner," he nodded to himself. "Now I know why God created so many different people." Molly flashed her smile for rare occasions. "Why is that?" she asked. "So there would be some one for everyone." They had reached the end of the path. As if anticipating the mood, Brentner drew closer to Molly. Then, reaching out, he touched her tenderly. "I have finally met myself," he said. Molly arched her brow into a question mark. "I see so much of myself in you," he explained. Then he kissed her gently on the cheek. Blood invaded her face, and her eyes began to mist as liquid happiness rolled down her cheeks. Molly instinctively removed the eye-drop bottle to catch them. But she hesitated and put it back. Brentner was tempted to switch on his cassette recorder, but instead he brushed her cheek softly, letting the tears perch on his finger. He put his hand to his lips and tasted them. "I believe it is joy," he chuckled. "It has the flavor of delight." His eyes pondered her a moment. "You collect what's in tears, and I collect what's in ears, sound. But now the time has come to put away the time-spenders. For the real thing has come at last." And so it did. In that following month of March, when spring bloomed and God rested on his heavenly throne, our two strangers became friends, and then husband and wife. So it was no surprise to their family and friends that their wedding was held at Griffith's Memorial Garden. And, as Molly had observed, what better place in the world was there to say, "Till death do us part"? The End.